Thanks everyone. I guess I should point out a couple corrections. I actually started exploring places like this in 2005, when I started to do it weekly in 2007 actually. Also, that database of 266 is now closer to about 280. It's been a busy couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to try to be hurrying through this lecture. It's mostly visual, so I think we need to have the lights dimmed up here. I don't know how to do that. I'm going to be whipping through about 100 slides, but we're going to be skipping by many of them very, very quickly anyway. To begin with, I wanted to talk a bit about something, let's just get it out of the way, the methodology of what I do and how I do it. And then we're going to get into the actual content, because I'm getting really tired of being interviewed and talking about urban exploration. As Brother Anthony said, it's about visiting places that are not normally accessible by the public through ordinary means. That might include places that have been abandoned for whatever reason. By the way, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm not screwing up with the microphone or anything, good. We also spend a lot of time on rooftops, which is a surprisingly easy thing to do in Korea. And there is quite a large rooftoping photography community in Korea. We do other weirder things too, sometimes visit construction sites, rivers underground, all sorts of other tunnels, and even weirder random stuff. The important thing about this hobby though is the community of people who do this always stand by a rigid code of ethics. And I know one of the people in this room actually is always looking down his nose at me for not being as ethical as him sometimes. Not to name names. We also, in Korea, I face a lot of difficulties doing this because of trying to get along with local sensibilities. A lot of Korean people generally are bothered by my attention to places like this. One time several years ago, I was in an old kind of warehouse district just a little bit south of Namdaemun market, and I could hear smashing sounds outside. I didn't know what it was. I went upstairs about 3 or 4 flights, and I ran into this elderly scavenger who was throwing scrap metal out the window, and when he saw me, he asked what I was doing, and I said, "Oh yeah, just taking pictures." And he immediately said, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed for my country." So he was embarrassed that I was there taking pictures of just this area that he was scavenging. I found that very eerily ironic. Over the years that I've been doing this, I've felt like, looking back at my pictures, I've recorded a lot of neglected parts of contemporary history. Certain places and views, even, that no longer exist, might be only in some of the pictures that I've taken near the end of their lives. So over the last, I guess 15 years now, I've compiled a database online. I'm not the only contributor for Korea, but I've done most of it. This is a list of all the different types of sites I've gone to, so you can get an idea of how much I've seen and how I can, put some formalization into it. Abandoned neighborhoods, which are just large tracts of land with buildings anywhere between 1 and 3 stories tall. They cleared those all out at once, and these areas can be quite large. I've been to about 65 of those areas in Seoul, 11 outside of Seoul in Gyeonggi-do, and only 2 more outside, further away, just because I don't travel that much. This is really probably best as an indicator of where I've traveled rather than a lot of the other realities of urban renewal across Korea. So that's the interesting number here, is the 65 neighborhoods. In total, there's been all sorts of other things. I'm not going to go into them all because most of them aren't quite relevant to what I'm going to be talking about today. In total, this number here, 246, is roughly how many locations I've made, and there are many more that other people have done, adding up to 270, whatever. So I wanted to start by mentioning a few key points that you're going to see repeated visually throughout a lot of these pictures. Probably a lot of this is very familiar to most of you. I think most of you here know that Seoul is over 600 years old, and it's gone through a lot of different stages, but definitely following the Korean War, the slate was wiped clean and the city was rebuilt from scratch. And probably in that time, that level of, let's say, change and, I don't want to say damage, has been inflicted on the city many times. Also very important, Seoul is a very vertical city. If you ride around on a bike, you know what I'm talking about. You can't go anywhere without, you know, getting a bit out of breath. If you look up, there's always mountains around you, there's always buildings, there's so many different layers of it. And that, the politics of a lot of urban renewal issues come into play based on that slope. Seoul is always outwardly and upwardly expanding. We'll talk a bit more about how it's expanded over the last 50 years. Whoops. It's still changing very quickly, although it's slowed down a little bit because of the current mayor. And it's a juxtaposition of developed and undeveloped, industrial and post-industrial, first world and third world. And we talk about, you know, how it's, you know, you can see ancient buildings next to new buildings, but there's really a lot more to it than that. And there is also a lot of conflict in urban development because not everybody is given the same opportunities to advance with everybody else. So anyway, I'm going to skip through a lot of this. This is a map of Seoul, and everybody knows this. This is a pretty standard looking map to most of us now, but if you were to go back in time, even a little less than 100 years ago, it would have looked like this. And we are right now, I can point it out on my cursor, we're probably about right here, I'd say. The boundaries of Seoul were very different at the time. The mountains up here look pretty much the same and are very familiar. This down here at the southern boundary is Namsan. And one of the things that really shocked me a few years ago, there was a guy who had, I forget his name right now, but he posted some pictures on YouTube, sorry, Flickr of his childhood. He grew up in Korea in the 50s and 60s. And so he had pictures of his home in Itaewon, a village south of Seoul, so somewhere down here. Yeah, that's definitely now, we would probably consider that northern Seoul, a lot of people. So anyway, the expansion of Seoul happened over a very long period of time. During the Japanese occupation, Seoul expanded down south to Yongsan. So probably even when that guy lived there, Itaewon would have been part of Seoul already. Yongsan, Mapo-gu, Songdong-gu, Sadaemun-gu, Dongdaemun, and Yongryungpo were incorporated into Seoul City during the Japanese occupation. So roughly a central area here like that. And then only in 1975 was Gangnam added. And then after that, Gangso, which I can never, it's over here, yeah. And the city slowly expanded outward. In 1988, as recently as that, Yangcheon, Songpa, Seocho, Jungnam, and Nowon-gu were all added. And then 1996, which is pretty recent in my memory at least, they finally added Gwangjin-gu, Gangbuk-gu, and Kumcheon-gu. So I don't think there's any room to grow anymore because all of these areas here either border with mountains or with other cities. And it's either going to be eat up those other cities, which is unlikely, or keep going. Now we can actually see a lot of history in just downtown. Not too long ago, I wanted to add some of this content. In Sungodome, they dug up a few buildings, and of course I went in and saw them when they were going down. But more interestingly, after they were gone, the archaeological surveys came in. As far as I know, in Jongno-gu and I believe Jung-gu, every archaeological urban renewal project has to have an archaeological survey to see what was there before. And this particular area is in Sungodome, kind of across the street from, is that the Westin Joseon, I think? And yeah, it's, until very recently, this was a parking lot. And they just recently uncovered it and are doing this interesting excavation there. What happens after that? Almost certainly this won't be preserved. Best case scenario, something that I've been seeing happen a lot around downtown is they do this weird thing where they probably totally remove a historic site like this and maybe move it away for, I don't know, more analysis. Then they put it back and they put it under glass. I've noticed about 5 locations like this around downtown Seoul that have opened up in buildings in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. And I have a feeling we're going to start to see a lot more. And if this is actually meaningful, I actually don't really know. I kind of have my doubts. So anyway, after that era, we had, well, after the Joseon dynasty, we had the Japanese occupation of Seoul. And they really modernized the city and created a lot of buildings, most of which aren't still here, but there are still a few interesting exceptions. This is a picture from an area just a little bit west of Daeminum. And you can see, what was the name of this area? It's, I can't quite remember right now. Daeminum, Newtown, that's it. And when they were renewing this area, they demolished a large amount of really nice old han oaks. And in this one little cluster here, I was really surprised to notice this little building on top of the hill here. And these probably all maybe roughly date back to the Japanese occupation. And you can note that this little building here was built uphill of all these homes. The word in Korean for a lot of these buildings, correct me if I'm wrong, is called Joksan Gaok, which essentially means enemy home. And there are still many of these left, and I'm sad to see I don't see any of my friends who are experts on them right here, right now. But Robert Kohler is the guy to talk to about that. He leads a lot of tours for the RES to these things. And they actually have been having a lot of trouble preserving places like this because people don't really want them preserved in a lot of cases. There are a few exceptions. Seoul City Hall, of course, was built by the Japanese. And a few years ago in 2008, they almost destroyed it. But preservation committees managed to stop the progress right after the shells had struck, causing quite a bit of damage here. Also, Seoul Station was built during the Japanese occupation. They recently did a very interesting job of restoring it as Culture Station 284. It's a pretty nice place, but I don't really remember the old one. And this is from 1996, the Governor General Building. This big monstrosity was right in front of Gyeongbok Palace. And you can see, this is actually basically Chunghwamun right here. And I'm standing inside the palace while I'm taking this, and I can't see down to where the statues are because of the Governor General Building in the way. So they decided to remove this one just because of its very unfortunate position. Oh, you don't want to see a picture of me with long hair. Sorry about that. So during the Korean War, the pre-war population was 1.446 million. And right after the Korean War broke out, on June 28, 1950, Seoul basically was overtaken by North Korean forces. 1 million of the population remained and 400,000 evacuated. And then, not too later that year, Seoul was retaken by our side, and presumably a lot of those people moved back. Then a few months later, enemy forces retook Seoul, and once again, 800,000 were evacuated and only 133,000 remained. And then in 1951, March 14, it was retaken by our side again. So the amount of fighting that went through there really leveled the city quite a lot and didn't leave a lot behind. The city didn't quite suffer total devastation, but near total. Enough that there was really a chance to start kind of like a new city plan for it, which didn't quite happen because of the chaos in the ensuing years. Refugees returned to Seoul by the hundreds of thousands, and a lot of the people who lived there before found their homes destroyed, and a lot of other people just moved there over the next several years anyway. So shantytowns started appearing all over the city, and we're going to talk about three types in particular. The Moon Village, or Dongdaemun. My understanding is the term refers to how it's close to the moon, basically. And we'll also talk about Cheonggyecheon and the unusual developments that have happened there, as well as Seoul Sanga, which is supposed to become a greenbelt sometime in the distant future. So Moon Villages, everybody always says when one of these is demolished, oh, this is the last Dongdaemun of Seoul, but there's always more. This one here is still sitting somewhere in Dongjaku, and it has a low occupancy rate, but is still very much there. If you've been to Brazil, you might think it looks like a Brazilian favela, but certainly the culture that exists around here is very, very different. And currently, anybody who would live in an area like this is probably elderly, or at the very, very least, maybe an artist who's trying to have a weird experience. A lot of these, it happens. A lot of these places can date back to the 50s, but many of them are actually much younger. But basically, the reason that these exist on hillsides is because when everybody was moving back into the city, you know, the people who got there first and got the best land tended to be the richer people. So the poorer people just built higher and higher up on the hillsides until they could have, until they could find a natural spot. Some of these places were very precarious. Many of them were really, really prone to all sorts of hazards like landslides and floods and things like that. Well, not floods, I guess that would still be landslides. People living along the riverside would have certainly had their problems with floods. And since about the 1980s, mostly because of the increase of cars and all sorts of construction technology, this land is a lot more popular to developers, so that's immediately where people, developers want to build now. I mentioned before that this country is, or this city is really still a juxtaposition of first world and third world. Here's an interesting example. I believe this building is gone now, but over in Sungodome, here's a house where they're raising their own chickens in front of some nice modern high-rises. And this is the kind of thing that you're not seeing as much of anymore, but it still exists. And it's still quite a shocking view of the gap in income of people like this. So one of the things that happened to a lot of these areas is they've become kind of art villages or mural villages. A lot of people are familiar these days with Ihwa Mural Village, where they have paintings on the walls. These two pictures are from Mural, which is over in kind of near Hongdae. And basically artists came in trying to support the people living there and drew art on the walls so that it would be recognized as having some sort of deeper intrinsic value. Did it? I'm not too sure. The residents are still living there and they're still stuck in the same conditions as before. No real improvements have been made to their homes. And we really can't save all these communities this way anyway, so I guess these things are going to exist as a novelty here and there across the country. Let's get on to Cheonggyecheon, a very popular place these days. It, of course, used to be the river that went right through the middle of Seoul, and then they decided to bury it. This is a picture of the shanty town that existed along the shore, or river, the bank of Cheonggyecheon, back before it was buried in the 60s. Here's a picture of it being buried in the 60s. Of course, these pictures aren't mine. I think it'll be pretty obvious which I took and which I didn't. Generally, if it's black and white, it's not mine. So I don't want to take credit for this, and I don't want you thinking I've been around that long. So they covered the thing up, and I wish I had visited there just a couple years earlier, because it sounds like when they uncovered it, they revealed some really amazing things. But during the 70s, 80s, 90s, and up to 2003 or 4, it was an overpass. And I guess probably a lot of people who are here now can't remember back when this overpass ran through what we now consider Cheonggyecheon. I barely remember myself, actually. When they demolished it, everybody was concerned about traffic, but some very unusual things happened about that. I actually have a slide about that later. This is modern-day Cheonggyecheon. I actually ran out and wanted to go to this area to take this picture because it's my favorite part of Cheonggyecheon, where they actually recreated the shanty town as part of the Cheonggyecheon Museum. It's a pretty nice park now, and there are a lot of big advantages to it. It was originally proposed in 2003, and at the time everybody considered it a vanity project of Mayor Lee Myung-bak. Everybody thought, oh, he's going to run for president, and he's going to use this for that. He was named Hero of the Environment in Time Magazine 2007, which might have been a bit hasty, but oh well. The redevelopment cost was $281 million US, and I don't remember the cost now, but it's been recently appraised that they're going to have to pay a lot more money to fix the ecosystem of this place. Management costs are always going up. The water that you see in it is basically pumped in from the Han River and also subway runoff. The actual original sources of Cheonggyecheon originate in the 3 mountain peaks on the northern side of Seoul, and because of basically the way that those hills are forested now, there's just no water coming down to fuel Cheonggyecheon. But I think Cheonggyecheon has been a success despite that, and despite the fact that it costs a lot and the water's not that clean. People love it. Like, if you go there, people are walking around. It actually succeeded in reducing the urban temperature of the downtown core by 3.6 degrees Celsius, which is very impressive on when you're sweating like I am. And the more unusual thing was an interesting term called Brace's paradox. Basically, Brace's paradox is that the more roads you build, the more cars will hit those roads and the more traffic there will be. If you remove roads, then you'll remove traffic somehow. So when the overpass was removed, traffic actually sped up and was faster and more efficient because fewer cars were on the road. Maybe people said, well, my route to work is gone, I'm going to take the subway. That's the best guess that I have. But it definitely held up and it reduced traffic in downtown. Oops. Oh yeah, that's the right side. The sad story about Cheonggyecheon was the market that they removed in order to restore the stream. Im Young-bak gave the marketeers of that area a promise. He said, you can move to Dongdaemun Stadium and set up your flea market there, and be there as long as you want. We'll fix it up, we'll make it world class, it'll be really nice. It didn't go that way, of course. If you haven't seen Dongdaemun Stadium around, that's because it's now Dongdaemun Design Plaza. In 2008, demolition began on this building. The baseball stadium next door had already been mostly knocked down. And 3 days after I took this picture at Dongdaemun Stadium, they sent in the hired goons to evict the people. It was 500 hired goons versus 75 mostly elderly people, like the people that you could imagine being here. And after that, they built Dongdaemun Design Plaza. So these people got kicked out of Cheonggyecheon, and then they got kicked out again of their second place. But anyway, I don't want to give Dongdaemun Design Plaza any more time than I feel like right now. More importantly to me right now is that there are many, many more of these underground rivers to be uncovered. There are a lot of potential future growth for parks all over Seoul. And this one looks, by the size of it, I think it might be actually bigger than Cheonggyecheon. If you want to know where it is, join me on Sunday with my Yongsan tour. We're not actually going to go there though. There are also many overpasses that will be demolished over the next while. This is Ahyeon Overpass, the first built in Seoul. I don't know about Korea, probably Korea. It was built in 1968 and they just knocked it down last year. They've knocked down a few others. And most interestingly, Seoul Overpass. I'm sure most of you heard about this project because it kind of made the news not too long ago. This overpass has been declared unfit for road traffic. So rather than knock it down, they're working on a plan to turn it into a park. And actually, I've been using this to drive to and from work for the last while. Over here, over where Namdaemun kind of touches with the other edge of it, there are protest signs from marketers there who don't want it knocked down because they're afraid it'll increase traffic, which is not what happened at Cheonggyecheon, of course. So I don't know. I think that a market that relies on foot traffic is going to really benefit from having foot traffic coming there from Seoul Station. We'll see. Oh yeah, so this is Seoul Station. This is old Seoul Station here. So I wanted to mention quickly, I always found this interesting. Im Young-bak, when he was the mayor of Seoul, he built a canal across the city. When he was president of Korea, he wanted to build a canal across Korea. And you can see on this his original plan to connect Seoul and Busan by water. Rather than go out here and go the long way around, I guess it might save some trouble. It was controversial enough that it didn't happen. Not controversial enough that he got that much criticism for it, but it ultimately became the Four Rivers Restoration Project. And you can see there are gaps here, like they wanted to connect this even underground partway to create the canal. Has this been a success? It really sounds not that pleasant right now, but I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's outside of Seoul. So let's move on to apartments and the rise of apartments that happened in the 60s. Apartments were first built as public housing, or 시민아파트, to give those people in those horrible little shanty towns a nicer place to live. What actually happened was the residents of Seoul who had more money were able to move in there first. So these apartments were mostly home to the middle class, many of the ones that I'll show to you soon. Originally, a lot of citizens were terrified of tall buildings, and it actually took a propaganda campaign linking the link between high-rises and affluence in order to get people to want to move into something like this, let alone something like this. So apartments began appearing in the 60s. I wouldn't say the affluent, judging by my wording here, but they housed the middle class, and some of them housed the upper middle class. Mapo Apartments was the very first, as far as I know, at least the first high-rise complex. It was built in 1962, and it had Western-style space heaters, not the Ondol system, which really caused a lot of problems for Korean residents who didn't really know what a space heater was and who were used to the advantages of an ondol. So the idea of not having an ondol in an apartment today sounds pretty ridiculous. And it was not popular without them in Mapo Apartments. These are gone. Seoul Arcade, I really should use one of my pictures, was an interesting place. It's basically 4 buildings linked together across the downtown core. And they have apartments up here, and then lower down they have markets and commerce. Most recently, when it was active up until the, I think 89, this was actually the main electronics market of Seoul until it moved to Yongsan. It was actually built on land that was originally cleared by the Japanese to make kind of what do you call it, like a big trench where if there was a fire during Allied bombing of Korea, which never happened, then the fire couldn't spread from one side to the other. So the land had already been cleared, and it was home to a shanty town, basically. So they were pretty easily able to evict those people and build this, the electronics market, which is still there and isn't an electronics market anymore. One of the buildings is now a modern hotel. It's been very nicely refurbished. One of the buildings hosts a flower market and is very fragrant. I really like it. And yes, the pornography stores also seem to be gone too, although you can still find some traces of them. It was originally considered a failure when it was completed because in the eyes of the architect, it kind of was strangulating through traffic. So that's one reason why the area around it is a little undeveloped, and everything to the the east of it, towards Namdaemun, is a little less nice than the side that, towards downtown. And there was a plan to restore it as a green belt, essentially turning it back into what Japan made there, a giant, mostly empty parkland. That has fallen through, but it still could happen maybe in a future mayoral administration. Hwaegan Shimin Apa트, looks like that's cut off, oops, was built in 1970 on the northern slope of Namsan. It's still there, and it's a beautiful building, but they have signs there warning you not to go there for just to take pictures. They're really tired of visitors. It's now rated D class, though. So there's been talk about redevelopment as far back as maybe 2003, maybe earlier. Oh, and there was a K-pop song written about it in 1982. If anybody remembers, Yoonsuil Apa트 apparently is about this place. Ogun Apartments, these were built in 1971 on the slope of Inwangsan, and they were intended to be within viewing distance from Chunghwamun, so that visiting dignitaries could see, these nice apartments that are going up. Unfortunately, they were demolished by 2010, maybe a bit later for some of them. But for a few years, there was a very interesting community that formed out of it called the Ogun Collective. I don't know if anybody is here from that right now, but they basically would have events where you could go and visit these buildings as they were mostly abandoned and walk on tours in it. They actually found some bowling balls in one building, and they set up a rooftop bowling alley, which was a really weird noise when you're walking around. There was still one elderly resident living in one of the old apartments, and I don't know what happened to her, but well, she's gone. And you know what they did with this? They built a city park, which is a great idea because if you want to go to a city park, there aren't many in Seoul, but if you're here, you don't want to have to walk another 50 meters to get to this city park. So, good choice. So the WOW apartments, this was kind of when this age of these kind of apartment buildings came to a close. Built in probably, I haven't found that date, but I'm guessing the very beginning of 1970. It collapsed 4 months after completion, killing 33 residents, I believe. Maybe in the building, maybe some below. You can see these buildings here. These would probably be, Wowsan is the mountain behind Hongdae University, so I think it was kind of towards Gwanghwamun Station. And you can see here there's just kind of nothing. This is where one of the buildings collapsed. Everybody thinks when an apartment collapses, it just kind of goes timber and falls down like that one in China. But this one was not built that way. It just disintegrated on the way down. It led to, the fallout from this led to the mayor, Kim Hyun-ok, nicknamed the bulldozer, which might sound familiar, stepping down. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of this style of apartments. Anyway, I want to hurry along, so maybe we'll skip some of these. I'll talk briefly about Yoyo and, no, actually, I'll talk about this quickly. Gangnam and why we have Kim Il-sung to thank for it. Probably a few of you have seen the movie Shinjuku, which is based on the real events when North Korean commandos infiltrated South Korea and got pretty close to the president. So then they went on to found Unit 684, which would inspire the movie. But also, Park Chung-hee decided to refocus urban development to the other side of the river and look more at Gangnam and Yeouido in order to build somewhere that was a little bit more, let's say, strategically safe. This is a picture of Gangnam basically under construction. I don't know which building this is, but it's the one right next to the field being plowed by a farmer with oxes. So if you can find that today, I'm sure you couldn't. And Yeouido and Namsan is a very interesting story also. Yeouido used to be, long ago, an animal pasture. The land really wasn't that stable and you couldn't build on it, and it was pretty awful. The name is supposed to mean, you can have it, island, or useless. Great name. In 1924, it was home to Seoul's first airport. And it was connected by bridge to Seoul only as late as 1970, because this was an island. But the interesting thing about it, of course, being an airport, could you imagine anything easier to build over? So it was very easy to create an entirely new city area that to me really feels like almost a North American downtown core. So the interesting thing about how they connected these two, of course, is the other island here, Namsan. Some of you might have heard of this. You're not allowed to go there. It's only for animals. In order to connect Yeouido with the mainland down here, they basically dredged up land from Namsan and laid it down here. And Namsan pretty well disappeared under the waves. Not waves, I guess. But only years after that, Namsan resurfaced somehow. So, yeah, and it's become a very interesting untouched part of the city. I'm not going to talk about the attractions of Yeouido, but blah, blah, blah. So let's get to modern urban development, which is much more my specialty right now. We're going to talk about apartment mega complexes and how they're made. Moon apartments, which is kind of my name for, like, we have Dal Dongnae, so why not Dal apartment, which are totally different. Remodeling, which we're not going to talk about much. Newtown projects, we already talked about vanity projects. So, major redevelopment projects in Seoul. This is a big long list I'm actually going to skip right now because all of these 34 projects were cancelled, as far as I can tell, as of, I guess, 2014. But let's look at Sungodome. That's the Seoul capital area, which includes Seoul, Incheon, and Gyeonggi-do. The population of that is 25.6 million, making it the third largest area in the world. And yeah, if you drive around this area, you'll never really notice where city ends and another city begins. But the strategy for the last since 1988 has been to develop Seoul by building communities outside of the city. So that's why you have places like Gundang, Ilsan, Sangdong, and so on. This is a list of all of the first and second phase new cities. The first new cities are like Ilsan in kind of this gray color, and the second new cities are in blue, like this. So there are a lot to go, and their populations are pretty large, but these are just like parts of existing cities already. They're just building density into existing cities, like how Gundang is in Songnam, or Sanbon is in Gunpo, or whatever. So they're cramming people in any way they can, not only in the city. Oh, and if you went on my Songdo tour, then here's your chance to make an appearance in an RAS lecture. they've been trying hard to decentralize Seoul's power by creating things like Songdo Ifez to take on a lot of the economic weight, which it hasn't picked up yet, and as well Sejong City, which is becoming the administrative capital and trying to decentralize the government that way. We'll see if it's working. Nobody seems to like Sejong City so far, I'd have to say. Anyway, how is the land cleared for most of these construction projects? This is a picture I used to advertise this talk today, actually, on, I think this one was on Facebook, or on my website, or on the RES website. This is what it looks like today. This was sometime late last year, this is sometime early this year. It was very quick, I have to say. I was quite sad to see it go. This is in Shinjuku. Seoul Station is around here. I used to live in Gumo, kind of over here. And I originally moved there because I loved the area and the beautiful kind of urban layout that it had, which is now mostly gone. I also used this picture to advertise online. This is Gumo 20 Guyuk. I'm not going to use Ishik Guyuk. And this, when I first moved to Gumo, I saw this area, and I thought, well, this must be where the really nice, rich families live. I went out there and walked around, and I liked it because these were actually like often single occupancy houses. Like they're 3 stories tall, they're skinny, and they'd have a lifestyle like what you might expect in North America, except they're so crammed together with tiny, tiny yards. But it was to me very, very visually appealing. This is what it looks like today. I was really sad to see that one go. Of course, there was already demolition happening in the lower left corner there. That was all kind of smaller buildings, but seeing that also broke my heart. This is a view into Gangnam Dome. That's Daeminum Newtown, just over by Daeminum, the gate. I refer to these green striped blankets as the flag of Korean urban renewal. They'll wrap them up around anything that you're not supposed to look at, and then most people won't look at them. I don't know how you can ignore that when the blankets are so ugly. On the other side, you can see garbage piled up, and beyond that, you can just see ruins and very few homes left, and then more city in the distance because it's Korea. But it's always something that catches my eye that I have to go and look closer. Let's talk about urban renewal and some of the negative consequences. Of course, if you lived in this place, it's not good. But if you didn't live here, then you might see the advantage of this part of the city upgrading, so that maybe you'll have access to nicer places. But there are several problems with that especially happen during the process that are addressed in different amounts of levels by the government and the construction companies. Somehow I woke up the other day with the word moonscaping in a piece of paper in my pocket, and as far as I can remember when I thought of the word, it refers to what happens in these places when they're just big empty dust bowls that are left for the wind to kick up dust and cause extra pollution. This can be a very unpleasant source of air pollution if you live nearby. As these areas go on, they try to cover them up with netting and everything. Or in this case with this blue tarp. So the idea is hopefully they keep the amount of dust down. But it's not pleasant and it takes quite a long time. Yeah, so this is over in Hongdae. This is Gajeu Newtown. It's over by Gajua area. Yeah, basically kind of by Digital Media City. This is one of the largest new towns I've ever seen, and if I had the ability to show panoramas on this, I would have, because it's quite a large distance, like 180 degrees around me. So an area like this used to be a regular neighborhood, just like the other ones I showed you, and now there's the same road cutting through, but nobody can really see what's on the other sides here. That can be pretty terrifying, and I'm going to show you a video why, if I can. Some of you might have seen this not too long ago in Yongsan, so if you want to go on my tour you can see this. Some people just had a very unpleasant surprise when they left the bus. Yeah, that fortunately, I'm a little happy that made the news, because it means it doesn't happen that often. So it's kind of always good if that's surprising to everybody. I got to figure out how to get back on track. Is it this one? Okay. Yeah, so fortunately there isn't a lot of foot traffic along here, but it wouldn't be a very pleasant place to go because you don't know what's on the other side of that fence. Another very common complaint that surrounding neighboring communities have is of noise of construction, of course. This construction might be going on for 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on how big and how fraught with disasters a construction project is. So you see these banners a lot. Right behind me as I was taking this picture was a very loud development project going on. Another thing that I find really sad, like especially with Namdaemun, was basically Namdaemun was incomplete from 2008 to 2014. So there was just this metal fence, and they were slowly clearing out stadiums and putting in the Namdaemun Design Plaza. But the actual Namdaemun that we knew before was half gone, and so we just didn't have access to it for a long time. It's really got to be tough financially for everybody to agree to set aside that amount of time. Of course, with Daeminum, they intended to have it built by 2010, not 14. But yeah, that's what can happen. You can lose a large part of a neighborhood. In other cases, more residential cases, they'll actually not partition off the land like that. They'll just leave the roads open so you can wander through. I've been to one abandoned neighborhood somewhere up north, I think in Nowon-gu, where a couple kids actually went out climbing in one of these areas and died. Fortunately, that doesn't happen so often, but it does happen, and these areas are generally left open to the public to wander through as they see fit. As you can see this woman and her 2 probably grandchildren doing. This picture, looking at it now, it didn't bother me at the time, but it terrifies me now because there's a school up here and there's a neighborhood, then there's a fence and a big plunge where there used to be a neighborhood. This actually made the news right after the Seoul Arcade last year. On the other side of the hill is another urban renewal area, and people were remarking on how they were digging out so clear the school that people were worried about a collapse. That is probably a concern people should have. I don't think I would want to live up here, I'll be honest. I'm sure there are scientists looking out over it, but I don't know if I want to trust my life to them. So I wanted to talk briefly about traditional Korean architecture, a very popular thing among RES people, but it's not quite my specialty. I have seen a lot of Hanok villages destroyed, and I live in a Hanok village that's being preserved through some very ineffective legislation. One thing I was able to find online is a list of the Hanok population of the city in 2006 and 2014. So this is all in Korean, but by different gu. So in Jongno-gu, where we are now, there were 6,336 Hanoks in 2006, 4,143 in 2014. That's a decrease of 35%. If you look at some of the worst places like, Sungodome is a bad one. They went from 943 to 187. So these places are really getting rid of Hanoks as fast as possible. Oh yeah, Mapo is a pretty bad one too. But this is a relevant number here, but it's not weighted for the size overall. But it's shocking to see how many they can go through. All of these are now demolished, of course. This is in Bukchon Hanok village. I literally took it out my bedroom window. This is a Hanok that I'm going to show you how it was preserved. Step 1, well, this is what it looked like before. Step 1 is demolition. And clear out the rest of it. Make sure nothing's left. Put in some concrete. Step 2, build an entirely new Hanok. And you might even notice that the way that it is laid out is completely different. It has no relationship to the new one. That's the last picture of that. I refer to these now as pod people Hanoks, because it's like, there's a Hanok over there, but it doesn't look like the one that I remember from a short while ago. There's just something unsettling about it. But that is a very common thing that's happening in Bukchon. That basically means the neighborhood might retain a lot of its characteristics, but it'll slowly over time phase out the individual buildings that it has. This is actually completed on a much larger process called apartment remodeling. Sometimes it's just a heavy renovation. Sometimes, as in the case of these buildings, Dogok Hongdae Apartments in somewhere near, well, Dogok, but closer to Yongsan Station, they put up fences over these, tore them down, built new ones in their place, and that's remodeling. So how do you demolish a building like this? Most of us think of demolition as dynamite or TNT. You make the plunger go down and the building falls, but we don't do that here. This picture was taken from the roof of this building. This is the old Korea Herald building, or no, this one is. So they park an excavator on top and it chews its way down, floor by floor. I've got a few other examples of that. This is Seoul Hotel in next to Hongdae Station. That one didn't get a lot of attention when they removed it. They just put out that fence, put an excavator on top, and chewed down. This one I just noticed last week. This was an old tax building kind of near the British Embassy. And then this is Doksugung here. They were actively demolishing it, and down here was a very large Christian protest of the Gay Pride Parade, who probably didn't know what was happening on the other side of that wall once again. And that is very concerning to me because this can happen. Whoops. Yeah, this is Namsan Home Place, or Namsan Baekgwajeon, a department store that was located in Gangnam-gu, kind of near Gangnam-gu Cheongsang Station. And I think it was 2008. During demolition, the excavator was chewing its way down, and the whole thing just collapsed, and 2 workers ended up dying. It did not make the news the same way as other department store collapses did. Thankfully, as I said, only 2 people died, but this happened during demolition. And this is not what demolition is supposed to look like. So yeah, pretty shocking. The thing that could happen in a lot of these places when they clear out, especially the larger neighborhoods, they need to dig out the land itself, like you saw it in that one picture earlier. This is a picture of a hill where all the buildings have been demolished. This was actually apparently a Catholic holy site located just southwest of Sungodome Station. There was a hill there, maybe about 100 meters tall, with an old Catholic site on top and a church and everything. They knocked down all the buildings and they dug out the ground and removed the hill itself and put apartments there. So there's just something strange to me about that, where you can remove not only the buildings but the land from underneath them. It just shows that so many of these projects aren't aware of any kind of link with anything that came before them. I guess it might have been nice to have apartments on a hilltop there. I don't know, maybe it wasn't stable or something. So how this happens is one of the most important aspects of how you get people to clear out. A lot of people will leave, they'll take the resettlement package and go. But a lot of others have to be coerced out by hired goons, which one of the names for them is Cheonggyecheon. And basically they're unskilled muscle that's contracted by corporations. They'll probably work for a company with one name, and they'll be contracted to construction corporations or small governments. Like these are the same people who evicted the marketeers from Insadong and more recently Gangnam. They don't require much training. They just need a jacket and then they can go and do their thing. Common tactics are dumping trash, terrifying residents, disrupting businesses, vandalism, and graffiti. These pictures are from Yongsan District 4, which we'll be talking about in a bit. You can see this area in particular, the imagery is especially violent. We have a guy being hanged over there, what looks like somebody who's been castrated and beheaded. Maybe that's his head there. And a flaming skull, so some pretty disturbing stuff. This is over in Wangshini, Newtown, which went down the year after, maybe 2010. I noticed that there were 2 competing people writing here. The first person wrote Oma Musowo Isagayo Appa, and they spell Appa wrong, of course. Appa, and I can't read the rest, but something, let's leave, I think. And then somebody else came over top and wrote Kangpe, which is kind of a pejorative meaning like gangster. It's a pejorative used to describe these people, but it also gives the impression that they're organized crime. They're really just organized laborers whose paid job is to hurt people, and they can do that under the watchful protection of the police if necessary. One of the bizarre things I've noticed going to abandoned places, the wording here is very specific. I don't have a blow up, but the same thing was written down here. I can read it, but you can't. Basically, ama, apa, musoyo, isagago shibayo, or whatever. So I suspect that must have been the same person. I don't think they're trading notes about like, hey, what do you draw on buildings? Let's trade notes here. I draw flaming skulls. You do that? Oh, cool. So I would like to study this more and find like signature artists. You know, maybe they deserve to be in an art gallery somewhere. Maybe not. So of course, those hired goons exist because of evictee protest movements. This guy, I photographed him on my way to an RES lecture last year. It's hard to read the sign, but you can find it later. Basically, I saw his sign and I discovered at the bottom he wrote Gumo Ishibuya, and I thought, oh, I know that place. So I went there, and sure enough, the buildings were being cleared out. Generally, these people are asking for resettlement money. They don't really care too much for preservation of their neighborhoods. They just want a better standard of living, and you really can't blame them, I think. The people who stand up and are protesting generally are the ones who are getting the worst deals. A lot of people do get good deals, of course. The people who participate in these movements are generally not seen very favorably by mainstream culture. They're seen as holding back progress or asking for too much money out of those poor construction companies. So yeah, here's another example. This is in Gangnam, where you can see, you know, the residents are exactly who you'd think. Elderly people with not many other places to go. Younger people can just move out and find another place. But this is, especially with the population curve right now, the housing situation for elderly people is going to be one of the big human rights problems of this country in the next 5 or 10 years. This is an evictee protest sales stand in front of Namdaemun Stadium. These are the same people who were kicked out in order to build Namdaemun Design Plaza. In 2009, they like to have this little decal everywhere that says, World Design Capital, Seoul 2010. That would sometimes find its way to very ironic places. This guy was, he ran a store kind of west of Chunghwamun. Well, west of, I don't know what to call it, west of the Isun Shin statue. They knocked down kind of a commercial area there. And I walked by, he's posing very proudly in front of a picture of himself being hauled away by the police. So, another way that these movements can manifest themselves is in something that is known in China as nail houses. If anybody can read Chinese, simplified Chinese, I think it's Ding Jihu, but I don't speak Chinese. It basically refers to a nail that can't be hammered down, unlike all the others. So you've probably seen some of the famous pictures where there's just a cleared lot, and then in the middle a column of dirt with a house on top, where the people don't want to come out. That happens in Korea too, and it doesn't get as much attention. Over by, I think, Seoul Station, this area, actually, yeah, this is the same as before, the area where, you know, they carved up downhill. There was a church here and a couple homes, probably belonging to people from the church. And so obviously these people had a legal thing tying them up in court so that they could stay here longer as everything else is removed from around them. And they're left literally on this like peak coming out of the middle of a construction site with nothing on either side. It's quite shocking to see places like this always. Of course, if these people are not handled properly, it can lead to some really awful things happening. In February 2008, we lost Chunghwamun, one of the gates of central Seoul. This fire was created by an elderly guy who was being evicted, and doesn't sound like he had everything working right in his head. So he decided, you destroyed my house, I'm going to destroy this. And that's what happened, and it was an awful thing. Fortunately, it's been rebuilt now, although maybe not as nicely. One of the good things to come out of a lot of these movements, though, they're not all, you know, fighting tooth and nail against hired goons and the police. Some places find creative reuses, like they might become temporary spaces for artists. This is a place called Space Beam in Incheon, near Daeminum, an area that's going through some probable changes in the near future. This place actually receives funding from the Incheon city government. So this building in particular is an old makgeolli factory, now an art venue. So very cool. This is an old military installation in Gumcheon-gu. I took this picture literally standing on Gumcheon-gu office. This, I was told, was called, the base was nicknamed Doha, which is supposed to mean crossing the river. And it was where they would build temporary bridges and bring them to the Han if the Korean War repeated itself and all of us up here needed to be evacuated to the southern side. The bridge that would save us would come out of here. It's no longer active. This little building in the lower right corner was turned into an art camp, Gumcheon Art Camp. And a lot of artists took up residence there and had use of this space for at least a year. This is a picture taken inside Duriban. It was a little noodle house building, 3 stories tall, right next to Hongdae University Station, where they actually managed to find a way to communicate with the local artists community. They invited writers in, they invited artists, they invited musicians, and if anybody is too familiar, this is the lead singer of Bamsan Pirates. And so they had such a flow of young people coming there, they were actually able to get a fair resettlement package and reopen somewhere else. Before that happened, this is an overview of the area. You can see this is Duriban here. This is an old hanok that was a restaurant. This is a police station that still is there today. And this is construction of the Gyeonggi line, the Gyeonggi Station, part of Hongdae University Station. In 2010, May 1st, for May Day, they had a concert they called Party 51. And this was actually made into a movie very recently that came out in January by a filmmaker who followed them around for the entire time. They had a 525-day protest against the redevelopment that they won, and it's all on film anyway. It's a very interesting place. Where do most evictees go? Well, not most evictees. I should say most evictees safely move away. Where do the worst off evictees go? Depends on the compensation. This is an area, this is, what's it called, down in Hoidong? Kind of near Kudiye Village. That's right. That's in the news a lot because it was just declared that this will be shut down and demolished. And they're hopefully going to build housing for the current residents in the new development, hopefully. But it seems to be commonly believed online that this community started when they were evicted in order to build the Olympic Stadium. It's possible they didn't live on the spot of the stadium, but there were a lot of beautification projects carried out to clear out a lot of shanty towns outside of city limits. This is just on the edge of city limits. So that could be why they moved there. This one is over just on the edge, kind of north of, what's it called, World Cup Stadium. So this one is actually gone now already. It was much smaller and didn't get as much attention. And Yongsan, let's talk about that because I'm leading that tour there. How much time do I have? Okay. Yeah. Yongsan is an area where a lot of really bad things happen. Some of them because of incompetence, some of them because of just too many eggs in one basket, some of them just because of bad luck, and others just, yeah. So this is Yongsan Station here, and over here is Yongsan Rail Yard, which is now just an empty lot. Most of these buildings have been cleared out, but not all. And there's a large amount of toxic materials still contained in the earth here. And I'll get to what happened with that later. Over here is Yongsan District 4, which is now also totally cleared out. Over here is the former red light district. They're now building like a couple one-room tel kind of buildings here on either side. And they've also got kind of a tent village, which has some very cheap, affordable food. It's a fun night of drinking if you go out there. As well, they recently, if you cross over the overpass and go to the electronics market, the first building there, the terminal electronics market, they've removed that and they're now building a tourist hotel there. Why anybody would want to stay in a hotel overlooking an empty rail yard, I don't know. And there's also Seoul Station, which was supposed to be demolished along with this in order to make the giant IBT, what's that again? Yeah. Nicola, you want to help me out? What's that called? The Yongsan project. IBD, I was right, yeah. So over here was going to be Yongsan, like I believe they were going to build an underground mall. This was going to be a giant complex. Oh yeah, I should. Oh, Dream Hub, that's it, yeah. It's an IBD. Yeah. And they had all sorts of plans for it where it looks beautiful and golden and everything. It was going to cost 30 trillion Korean won, and the land was going to be on an area roughly equivalent to 33 soccer fields. Here's another design that they came up with that was not popular because Americans felt a bit sensitive about that, and I think you can see why. That was going to be at Yongsan, and it fell through, thankfully. Although maybe it would have been better to have this than what actually is there. But over on the other side at Yongsan District 4 is where the Yongsan disaster happened. It was called Yongsan Chansa. I'm really going to have to go a bit faster. But on January 20, 2009, basically this happened. It looks like it was a big fire that occurred on top of this building. And up here was an evictee kind of hideout, where they had a kind of fortress set up to protect themselves. And the police moved in, set up a crane, took a cargo container, filled it with anti-terrorist riot police, and had them lift it up and drop down on the building, because basically to try to end a standoff really quickly. They couldn't go in from below because the evictees had been pouring all sorts of accelerants on the stairs, saying like, if you come in here, you'll spark a fire, you'll kill us all. You wouldn't do that, right? So they decided to try to get around it like this, and it didn't work. One police officer and 5 protesters died. And that is when urban renewal became a very public issue in Korea. I wish that they had picked up on it earlier, because the story for these people had started at least a year in advance. They were already being harassed by the hired goons. The pictures earlier of that very violent graffiti was taken just about down here. So those people were camped out on this roof because they had to hide and protect each other from the hired goons. There were reports that they were throwing things, including Molotov cocktails, from the roof. Some reports say they were throwing just randomly, wildly at any citizens. Other reports say they were throwing them to ward off the hired goons. Who knows, probably when you're throwing things from a roof, both could be true, I'll be honest. 5 minutes, okay. So I'll just plug the RES visit to Yongsan. We can actually go to the site where this was. The buildings are all gone. What's in their place is a parking lot. This is the picture I used at the start because I wanted to show that they decided to have this World Design Capital, Seoul 2010, Design for All banner right in front of the building where the fire took place. So probably one of the most tasteless pictures I've ever taken. That's not on me though, of course. But this was taken maybe a month after that, and yeah, it was pretty shocking. I'll see what else there is. Yeah, Yongsan today, this is what it looks like. It's a big empty area with a big crater-looking thing in the middle. I think it was Robert Kohler on his blog said, "I sometimes think the Seoul Metropolitan Government should leave the big empty hole in Yongsan as it is a memorial to bad city planning." I kind of agree. Over at Yongsan District 4, you can see it's pretty well nothing. The whole lot is overgrown with reeds and weeds and everything. A quote I got from the media from the widow of one of the protesters who died. She said, "I'd feel less wronged if a new building was standing." So that really makes us think, like, if you're going to go to the trouble to evict people, at least go to the trouble of following through and building something in its place. I think that's a lesson that we have to learn from Yongsan. Of course, we have to remember that apartments are much nicer. I'm sure many of you live in nice, modern apartments here. I lived in one for a while. They have a higher quality of life. They're clean, spacious. You have hot water all the time, better water quality. You could probably drink out of the tap now. Most of us would really want to live in one of these. They are exclusive and not available for everyone. Probably even if there was poor housing made, the same thing would happen that happened in the 60s. Probably all students would move into it rather than elderly poor people. So something needs to be done. I have problems with them, of course. They discourage through traffic, which I think is going to duplicate the negative effects we've seen of cul-de-sacs in North America, where it creates communities that are car-based. And it also decreases safety because it's harder for ambulances to get in. It's, there's less foot traffic, so, if something bad happens, there's less likely to be witnesses, whether that means an accident or a crime. That could happen. They're ugly as hell, aren't they? I mean, you look around the city and you just see non-stop high-rises. They're not nice on the eyes, but that's an aesthetic matter that I think could be easily addressed and is improving. And also probably they're not going to last forever also. They'll probably be gone in 30 or 40 years, or at least renovated. What's lost? We lose economic diversity and mixed income housing, where you have, let's say, working class people living with middle class people living with rich people, which, I'll be honest, sounds like my ideal way of living. We lose mixed-use residential commercial zoning, where you can just go outside and there's stores right there. We miss organic developed communities with their own architectural and geographic histories, and we lose walkable neighborhoods. So all of these are things that I do regret. And I think we're at the end. Yeah, we can skip all of that. Yeah, I don't want to talk about that right now. So let's call it the end. Okay.
Thank you.
A few questions.
Way in the back.
I'll make it. You have report the reality of building.
I think maybe you should use the microphone.
Building construction activity in Seoul.
Oh, that I've visited.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can go to the beginning. Yes?
But what should be the ideal type of residence?
What should be the ideal type of residence?
In the future.
Personally, I think that maybe everybody has their own answer to this. I think I hinted at it in that last slide, where I think it's good to have mixed income housing, so that you have people of different economic backgrounds living together, as well as commercial, residential mixed in a much more updated version of what is in the old buildings, though, I think. Obviously, progress has to go through, don't you think? So, as far as communities that I think are doing better, and there are problems with them, I'm more impressed these days with, what's it called, Yeonhee-dong, if you know that one, where they're renovating building by building, but not destroying that much heritage, and making an interesting kind of residential commercial community that feels modern. So that would be my preference. Does that answer? Yes, please.
Okay, this is not the question, but the terminology. In our language, the area, vicinity or surrounding the Great Seoul, we call it Sudokwan.
Sudokwan, yeah.
Sudokwan. But you translate it into Korean Sudokwan.
Oh, did I? Whoops.
So you must correct for your next lesson too.
Thank you, yes. Okay, I like getting corrected on my spelling. Anybody else have any other corrections? Oh, sorry.
John.
Yeah.
Regarding, you may not be able to answer this, if not, just don't bother, but regarding architectural heritage, I'm sure you're aware, it's a massive bomb crater behind the Samsung Securities building in Cheonggyecheon. I looked there a few weeks ago. There were a lot of foundations from what looked to me like very old buildings.
Like,
you say they're roughly in the 1850s or the 1950s or the 1450s.
You mean like that?
It looked a little bit like that, but I think it's a slightly larger lot. Okay. And I happened to look in the other day, they've covered it all up, and now it's just literally a hole.
Cheonggyecheon Tower, right?
Behind the Cheonggyecheon Tower,
yes,
yeah.
So
are there national or city regulations which protect these areas before the construction goes ahead?
I can't speak to that. I actually wish that our friend Jo In-suk was here, because she would definitely know the answer. But as far as I can tell, all they have to do is do the survey, see what there is, and then maybe take some items away, and then just get rid of the rest. I mean, when you get down to it, it's interesting that these walls are here, but what value can they really make of it? I mean, other than making yet another one of these. So I don't know, to be honest, I don't know the letter of the law itself, so that's something I want to look into, because I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Like that area that you're talking about, that's the one that went viral when somebody posted a picture on some architecture website. And did you see that? Yeah, it was like right when they had everything excavated, and then immediately after that they just started wiping it out.
Yeah, that's what it is now. Just
yeah.
Out of curiosity, also, tell us the situation with what was to be the new US Embassy building, and then Yeah, pretty much mine, the US ambassador's residence, which is just nothing's happened there for about 10, 12 years.
Oh, in Daksugun.
No, well, literally right next to the US ambassador's residence.
Yeah. Sorry, not in Daksugun. I remember the name of the place. It was kind of complicated. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about it after. I've got a lot more information about that place. Yes, Renton.
Hi, John. You told me on a walk you once that I was rather surprised that you said it was an American who actually done the historic preservation going in that cultural district down here. And I'm wondering if these now it seems like it's a very, very vibrant tourist area.
Bukchon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is historic preservation becoming more of a kind of like a homegrown, home-driven interest, or is it taking that foreigner to
Well, that area is extremely popular with Korean tourists as well as all sorts of others. Okay, I'll use the mic then. Basically, the area is popular with all sorts of people. Like living there, I see Korean tourists more than I see Chinese tourists, more than I see Japanese tourists, more than everybody else. It's a strange area. As I said, like they're replacing it building by building at a time, so that maybe in 10 years we'll look around and say, oh, look at the heritage, and not a single building will be, more than 10 years old. It's preferable to some of the other things that they do. As far as preservation, it's unusual because residents are moving out, and a lot of the places are becoming businesses. I don't know. I'm reserving my judgment on that one.
Cheonggyecheon and Samcheon.
Yeah. We're talking about Bukchon.
That's the same thing. It's going up Arctic.
Yeah. I have much less to say about Sachon.
Demolition. It was demolition. Demolition rather than preservation.
Someone's talking?
Yeah.
I just wish that you could probably use a little bit more balanced perspective towards your presentation.
Here, do you want a microphone?
No. I'm not saying necessarily everything new is better,
No.
but at the same time, I don't agree that everything old should be preserved just because they're old.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Yeah. So I was hoping that because you spent a lot of time discussing the negative consequences of renewal project, but there should be also like some positive consequences. I'm sure there is. So maybe you can probably also cover that in the future. And I have 3 comments to make. First one is about the toxic things in the Yongsan development area, because they were done by US military.
Not in that one, as far as I know. That was originally the toxins would have got there because of Korail's rail yard. If the U.S. military had any access there, somebody might have to tell me about that.
Yes, but in larger context, like Yongsan military base, which is also part of the development plan.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah. So that one. Another one is, I think, regarding the Yongsan disaster, not everybody who was protesting.
No, absolutely not.
Evictees, so they're pretty violent, and the government had a reason to step in.
Yeah.
Would have been nice if they were not there.
Yes. Yeah.
And another one is the Yongsan development project. It was because of the poor planning, but at the same time, the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, the project didn't collapse until 2015. But
yeah, sure. But I really enjoyed your presentation. This was really good.
thank you.
One more.
Yeah, well, I have to address some of those. First of all, I have to admit that I can only show you so much in an hour. One of the other slides is a bit more about how Yongsan will change. Personally, the people that I know who were involved in the Yongsan protest, and even a few of them actually appeared at Judiban later, many of them are quite radicalized, and these movements do attract radical elements. So for that reason, it's good for people to not try to help too closely with evictee movements, because you never know if it's a person who's actually out for money, or if they're just out to make the government look bad. In the case of the Yongsan disaster, one of the biggest problems with that, though, was that it was in such a visible area. the police moved in much earlier than they normally would have. Normally those protests can go on with like a little rooftop house for months, maybe even a year or two. But in this case, the first day that the police took charge of it, they loaded up and went in. So maybe it would have happened the same if they waited a month, I don't know. But it was definitely mishandled. If you've seen the movie Two Doors or Chunghwamun, it goes into a lot of detail about that. Did I say that right? Chunghwamun? I forget.
Because I passed that area when that thing happened, so
Yeah.
I remember it was very scary to me that there were jumping kids in the river.
Yeah. Well, the scary image for me was coming there shortly after and seeing the remaining evictees having a memorial there. There were maybe about 6 of them. And then on both sides of the streets were riot police buses as far as the eye could see. That to me was the scary part. But, yeah.
I just flew out from San Francisco where you know, gentrification in the Mission District in Silicon Valley is a very hot topic as well. And we know that with large development projects, the people who move out don't always move back in, and you know, it's. So I wonder, and it may not be a fair question to you because you're looking more at architecture and the use of the space, but do we have any knowledge about the redistribution of Seoul's population by income or by age over the last 10, 15, 20 years?
I don't have hard data. I've been, you know, kind of using my own observations, which are faulty, of course. But generally, the new apartment buildings that come up are intended for kind of yuppie families that are gonna, you know, move in after getting married and raise a family. There really is no room in any of those high-rises that you see for smaller families, poorer people, and things like that. Generally, I mean, when that kind of neighborhood goes down, some people, some of the owners actually have the opportunity to buy in, so that if they keep their money invested in their old place as it's demolished, they can get a lot in the new place. But it's surprisingly tricky to do that. And I know somebody who went through that and hung on by a thread, but everybody else dropped out. So it's a tricky thing. The big issue right now is just the elderly poor who have no place to go. So everybody else, like the younger student type people, they'll find somewhere else. And there's always places in Seoul. Sorry, Jen, I don't think we have time for more comments.
I want to address that because I do know something about that.
Oh.
Actually, the biggest housing gap area that they need to fill, but they're not, is for young families.
Young
so
families?
It's for small households of 2 people who are getting married, maybe have small children, who cannot afford to buy into the apartments in the first place.
Oh, yes, okay.
Old people get displaced. Young people can't get in at all.
Okay. Young poor families, you could have a point.
Not even poor, middle class.
Young middle class poor, yeah.
Young, right up to sort of the middle class. It's
Yes.
extremely difficult.
That's a very, very good point. Those people can move into the older neighborhoods that might get evicted soon, but it's not a place to evict, to start a family and to, invest, really. So,
majority of the housing that's being created is created for too high in the market for the people who actually need housing.
absolutely, yeah, that's a big
But
problem.
the people who are occupying those, because there's a constant destruction of the property at the lower end, and it's being replaced with upper end housing, it's created a very big gap between who has housing and who needs housing.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
We have to end.